When the Peloponnesian War ended, Greece should have found peace. Instead, it found silence, the kind that follows exhaustion, not resolution. Athens was defeated, its walls torn down, its empire gone. But Sparta, the victor, did not inherit a stable world. It inherited a fractured one. Cities were angry, alliances were brittle, trust was gone, and the habits of war were too deeply ingrained to abandon. For generations, Sparta had feared empire. Now it had won. Spartan leaders installed garrisons across Greece, replacing local governments with loyal overseers. Cities that had once fought beside Sparta now lived under its watchful eye. The language of liberation gave way to the reality of control, and resentment spread quickly. Sparta had won the war by discipline and endurance, but ruling demanded flexibility, something Spartan society was never designed to provide. Its rigid system worked for survival, not diplomacy. For control, not cooperation. Meanwhile, Athens survived. Weakened, humiliated, but not erased. Its people adapted, trade returned, culture persisted, and quietly the city waited. Not for revenge, but for opportunity. Across Greece, smaller city-states faced impossible choices. Align with Sparta and accept domination. Resist and risk destruction. Neutrality no longer existed. War had become the default condition. Then Sparta made its greatest mistake. It began fighting everywhere. In Asia Minor, Spartan armies challenged Persian interests. In central Greece, they crushed dissent. In the north, they interfered in local disputes they barely understood. Each intervention created new enemies. Each victory made the next war more likely. And while Sparta exhausted itself trying to hold everything together, one city watched carefully: Thebes, long dismissed as a secondary power. Thebes remembered what Sparta had done during the Peloponnesian War: the occupations, the interference, the humiliation. The city waited, rebuilt, and prepared. Not to resist Sparta's system, but to replace it. Because Greece was about to learn a brutal lesson. The end of one great war does not bring peace. It creates the conditions for the next. And this time, Sparta would not be ready.
Sparta had never wanted to rule Greece. That was the cruel irony. For centuries, Spartan power rested on fear of instability, fear of revolt, fear of disorder. Fear that its tightly controlled society would collapse if the world changed too quickly. Winning the Peloponnesian War forced Sparta into the role they hated. Empires need leaders, but Sparta only had fighters. Across Greece, Spartan harvests, military governors were installed in defeated cities. Local laws were rewritten. Governments were replaced. What Sparta called order, others experienced as occupation. The cost was immediate. Spartan citizens were few. Their society depended on helot labor back home, and every soldier sent abroad weakened control at home. Campaigns dragged on. Wealth flowed in unevenly. Discipline began to crack. Even worse, Sparta's moral authority evaporated. The city that once claimed to defend Greek freedom now crushed dissent with the same brutality Athens once used. Former allies whispered the same accusation everywhere. Sparta has become what it defeated. Resistance spread. Athens quietly rebuilt its navy. Corinth turned hostile. Persian gold returned to Greek politics. Fronting enemies of Sparta wherever it could, war, once centralized, became constant and scattered. Sparta responded the only way it knew how, force. But force no longer solved everything. Each suppression bred another rebellion. Each victory required another garrison. And every Spartan soldier lost abroad was one less guarding a fragile homeland built on fear. Meanwhile, in central Greece, a different kind of preparation was underway. Thebes was learning, adapting, waiting. And when Sparta finally turned its full attention toward Thebes, it would discover that warfare itself had changed. Thebes had long lived in Sparta's shadow, mocked for its culture, dismissed for its politics, treated as a second-tier power in a world dominated by Athens and Sparta. But humiliation can be a teacher. Spartan occupation left scars. Thebes endured garrisons, interference, and forced obedience. Its leaders were exiled or executed, its independence stripped away. And when the chance came to resist, Thebes did not waste it. A quiet revolution began. At its center was Epaminondas, a thinker as much as a general. He studied philosophy, music, and warfare with equal seriousness. He believed strength did not come from tradition alone, but from adaptation. And Sparta had stopped adapting. The Thebans reorganized their army. They trained citizens more broadly. They questioned the rigid hoplite formations that had defined Greek warfare for centuries. Instead of symmetry, they embraced concentration instead of tradition innovation. They also changed how soldiers thought about themselves. The sacred band of Thebes, an elite unit, bound by loyalty and shared identity, embodied this shift. Discipline was no longer enforced solely by fear, but by connection. Sparta underestimated all of it. To Spartan commanders, Thebes was still manageable, still inferior, still bound by the old rules of war. They would soon learn how dangerous that assumption was. Because when the two armies finally met, it would not be a battle decided by numbers, but by ideas. For centuries, their hoplites were the undisputed masters of the battlefield. A wall of bronze and muscle, disciplined to perfection, moving as one unstoppable force. Their reputation was so fearsome that many conflicts ended before they even began. To face a Spartan phalanx was to face certain death. In the year 371 BCE, near the quiet village of Leuctra, this age-old truth was about to be put to the ultimate test. Thebes, a rival city-state, had dared to challenge Spartan supremacy. In response, Sparta dispatched its finest, led by their king, Cleombrotus. It was meant to be a simple, brutal lesson in obedience, a demonstration of power to remind all of Greece who was in charge. The Spartans arrived confident, their battle plan the same one that had brought them victory for generations. They would array their forces in a long, even line, with their elite troops holding the place of honor on the right flank. They would advance, crash into the enemy, and grind them into dust through sheer discipline and courage. It was simple, direct, and had always worked before. But on the other side of the field stood a man who wasn't interested in playing by Sparta's rules. His name was Epaminondas, the leader of the Theban army. He knew that meeting the Spartans head-on, strength for strength, was a recipe for disaster. Thebes couldn't beat Sparta at its own game. So, he decided to change the game entirely. As the two armies formed up, the Spartans must have been puzzled by what they saw. The Theban line was strange. It was lopsided, unbalanced. On the Theban right and in the center, the soldiers were arranged in a relatively thin formation. They seemed hesitant, almost holding back. But on their left wing, directly opposite the elite Spartan contingent, something extraordinary was happening. Epaminondas had stacked his best troops, the legendary sacred band of Thebes, into a column of unprecedented depth. Instead of the standard 8 or 12 ranks deep, the Theban left was a staggering 50 ranks deep. It was a dense, terrifying hammer of men, poised to strike a single point. This was the birth of a revolutionary new tactic, one we now call the oblique order, or refused flank. The idea was genius in its simplicity and audacity. Epaminondas would not fight the entire Spartan army at once. He would refuse to engage with most of it, holding his weaker center and right flank back at an angle. All of his power, all of his focus, would be concentrated on one decisive point, the Spartan right wing, where their king and their finest warriors stood. It was an all-or-nothing gamble. If this massive column failed to break the Spartan elite, the rest of his thin line would be hopelessly outmatched and enveloped. The entire fate of Thebes rested on the tip of the spear. The horns blew, and the dust began to rise. The Spartan army advanced as it always had, the unified wall of death, expecting to sweep the Thebans from the field. But the engagement they anticipated never came. The Theban center and right wing slowly retreated, refusing to meet the Spartan charge. They were drawing the Spartan line forward, stretching it, disorganizing it, all while avoiding a direct fight. Meanwhile, on the left, the real battle began. The 50-deep column of Thebans, with the sacred band at its head, did not advance straight on. It moved forward and sideways, angling to hit the corner of the Spartan right flank with overwhelming, concentrated force. The Spartans on that flank were the best soldiers in the world. They held their ground with the iron discipline they were famous for. But they were only 12 ranks deep. For every one Spartan in the front line, there were for Thebans pushing behind their champion. The sheer physical pressure was immense, a human battering ram smashing into a brick wall. The sound would have been horrific, the crunch of shields, the splintering of spears, the screams of men being crushed by the sheer weight of the bodies behind them. King Cleombrotus, fighting in the front ranks alongside his men, was among the first of the high-profile casualties. His death sent a shockwave through the Spartan formation. Kings weren't supposed to die, especially not like this. The Spartan elite fought with desperate courage, but courage alone couldn't defy physics. The relentless pressure of the Theban column was simply too much. First, the front ranks buckled. Then they broke. And then, the unthinkable happened. Spartans, the warriors who had taught from birth that victory or death were the only options, turned and fled. They ran. This was a sight no one in Greece had seen in living memory. The collapse of the elite right wing created a domino effect. Panic spread down the rest of the Spartan line. Seeing their king dead and their champions routed, the morale of the other soldiers shattered. The battle, which was supposed to be a grinding affair, turned into a rout. The Thebans, having won the decisive point, now wheeled and began to roll up the disorganized and terrified Spartan flank. The fighting was over in less than an hour. The results were catastrophic for Sparta. Out of the 700 elite Spartiates who marched onto the field that day, 400 lay dead, including their king. Thebes had lost fewer than 50 men. It was one of the most lopsided victories in ancient history. But the true impact of Leuctra wasn't measured in the number of bodies on the field. It was measured in the shattering of an idea. The news of the defeat spread across Greece like a wildfire. At first it was met with disbelief. It seemed impossible. But as the survivors limped home and the truth was confirmed, disbelief turned into shock, and shock turned into something else entirely: opportunity. For generations, the Greek world had been organized around a single, unshakable fact: Spartan military supremacy. Their power was built not just on their army, but on the myth of their invincibility. It was this fear that kept their allies in line and their enemies in check. On a single afternoon at Leuctra, Epaminondas and the Thebans had not just defeated an army, they had destroyed that myth. The psychological impact was immense. City-states that had long chafed under Spartan domination suddenly saw a crack in the foundation of their world. They began to wonder if a future free from Spartan interference was possible. Rebellions and defections followed. The Peloponnesian League, Sparta's network of alliances that had been the bedrock of its power for over a century, began to crumble. Epaminondas capitalized on this momentum. In the following years, he led Theban armies deep into Spartan territory, something that was previously unimaginable. He liberated the Messenian Helots, the enslaved population whose labor was the entire basis of the Spartan social and economic system. This was a mortal blow. Without the Helots, Sparta could no longer afford to maintain its professional warrior class. Their entire way of life was dismantled. The Battle of Leuctra didn't just end a war, it ended an era. It marked the end of Spartan hegemony and ushered in a brief period of Theban dominance. But more importantly, it was a turning point in the history of warfare. Epaminondas's tactics, the concentration of force, the refused flank, the principle of attacking a decisive point with overwhelming strength were revolutionary. He proved that strategy and innovation could defeat tradition and brute force. His ideas would be studied for centuries to come, influencing great commanders from Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great all the way to Napoleon. Leuctra serves as a powerful reminder that no power is eternal and no myth is unbreakable. It shows that true strength lies not just in muscle and discipline, but in the courage to think differently, to challenge assumptions, and to change the rules of the game. The story of Leuctra is the story of how one man's brilliant idea, executed with audacious courage on a single afternoon, brought an empire to its knees and changed the course of history forever. Because once the illusion of invincibility is shattered, fear disappears. After Leuctra, the game changed instantly. Thebes surged forward, and Spartan dominance didn't just fade, it collapsed almost overnight. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was a societal upheaval. Allies defected, Spartan garrisons were expelled. Their armies, once the terror of Greece, were now struggling to defend the home territory. Even Sparta's iron grip on its massive Helot population weakened. The unthinkable happened. Theban armies marched into the Peloponnese itself and struck at the very heart of the Spartan system. It was unprecedented. It was unforgivable. Thebes, under the brilliant leadership of Epaminondas, freed Messenia, a vast territory that Sparta had controlled, enslaved, and exploited for centuries. This wasn't just a loss of land. It was the annihilation of the economic and social foundation that allowed Sparta to exist as a militarized state. Sparta survived the war, yes, but it would never, ever recover its former power. The foundation of the great Lacedaemonian machine had been cracked beyond repair, and yet Thebes faced a massive problem. It could not hold what it had so spectacularly broken. The resources of Boeotia were limited. The alliances that Epaminondas had forged against Sparta were intensely fragile, held together by shared animosity more than shared goals. Crucially, Thebes' stunning success depended almost entirely on a single mind: Epaminondas himself. He was the strategist, the diplomat, the motivator, the indispensable figure holding together a massive, shifting coalition. Without him, the system faltered, threatening to unravel at any moment. Worse still, for all of Greece, the entire polis system was exhausted. Decades of internecine warfare had drained every major power. No single city, not Athens, not Sparta, and now not even Thebes, had the inherent, lasting strength to impose permanent order or lasting peace. Athens re-entered the game, cautious and opportunistic, seeking to rebuild its naval league. Sparta desperately clung to survival, willing to ally with anyone, even Persia, if it meant preserving its territory. Thebes won battles, yes, stunning victories that rewrote the map of Greece. But they failed to win the peace. Power circulated wildly. Stability vanished. The war after Leuctra was much quieter, but a total mess. It was so much more damaging. An age of perpetual skirmish, mercenary armies, and endless diplomatic betrayals. Then instability reached its climax in 362 BCE at the Battle of Mantinea. It was a massive conflict, Sparta and Athens facing off against Thebes and its allies. Thebes won the field, but they paid the ultimate price. Epaminondas finally fell in battle. His last command, delivered as he lay dying, was to tell his troops to make peace, with Epaminondas dead. Theban momentum died with him. The coalition instantly fractured. Once again, Greece stood utterly divided, exhausted, and incapable of self-governance. The great cycle of hegemony, Spartan, then Theban, then possibly Athenian, had utterly failed. The cost of this constant, grinding conflict was invisible to those still fighting. They were too consumed by the local feuds and immediate rivalries. But that cost was not invisible to those watching patiently from the north, specifically. It was not invisible to the growing, ambitious kingdom of Macedon. Their time was coming. Athens was cautious and diminished. Greece had spent decades proving it could destroy greatness, but not replace it. The cities remained proud. Their culture endured. Their debates continued. But their unity was gone. Their strength was fragmented, and their wars had taught the wrong lesson. They believed power still belonged to the past, north of Greece. A kingdom watched and learned. Macedon had studied Greek warfare, Greek politics, Greek mistakes. It had seen how innovation mattered, how unity mattered, how exhaustion created opportunity, and when it moved south, no city would be strong enough to stop it alone. The Theban, Spartan Wars were not remembered for their conquest. They were remembered for what they failed to prevent. Because history does not reward those who fight the longest. It rewards those who learn when to stop. If you enjoy cinematic history, deep storytelling, and long-form documentaries that treat the past with respect and honesty, consider subscribing to Elemental History.